Hi, everybody. I'm Essex County Commissioner Brendan Gill, also honored to be the chair of the Montclair Dems. We're excited to present the interviews with Mary Alice Williams. This year, there is no more important election across the country than the race to become the next governor of the state of New Jersey. I'm proud to lead this great statewide organization made up of over 12,000 volunteers who help to elect our Democratic candidates up and down the ballot. In order to educate our members, as well as the public, the Montclair Dems is proud to produce a series of long-form, one-on-one interviews with all 6 Democratic candidates for governor. We are privileged to have legendary broadcast journalist Mary Alice Williams conducting these interviews. Today, we're honored to be joined by our Congresswoman Mikie Sherrill. Congresswoman Sherrill is a 4-term member of Congress from Montclair who represents New Jersey's 11th Congressional District. Without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Mary Alice Williams and Congresswoman Mikie Sherrill.
Thank you, Brendan. I'm with Mikie Sherrill, 4th-term representative for the state of New Jersey. Why do you want to be governor?
You know, there's so much opportunity in the state, but right now it's just not available to everyone. And I have 4 kids here, so I'm really invested in making sure the future of our state looks bright. And we need a different kind of leader to do that. And at the same time, we have a federal government that is attacking not just the economy of New Jersey, but our very value system. So as governor, I'm going to make sure to fight back against Washington while at the same time delivering on affordability for people here in New Jersey.
And we're going to drill down into specifics on those. But what challenge have you faced in Congress or the military that best positioned you to lead a state like this?
Well, as you may know, the military is a series of challenges. It's every single day you're preparing for a crisis. And the training that you receive there is really important to kind of take that head on. I always say in the military, we learn to run to the fight, which is different from most people, if you will. But then also, I think leading men and women. When you're there, you are responsible in the Navy because, you know, if some of the people in my squadron were deployed overseas and they had a family member struggling or their spouse wasn't able to make rent or one of their children was in the hospital, I had to go make sure their family was taken care of and get them home if need be. So that really gives you a deep insight into how to lead men and women and how to make sure you're taking care of the community and what those needs really are.
The buzzword for this campaign in 2025 is affordability, right? Property taxes are up. Utility costs are rising, 20%? How do you make living here more affordable?
So you're exactly right. That is the key thing I hear from people. And within that, the number one cost that people are concerned about is housing. So because the housing market has gone up so quickly in the past 5 years, housing prices have gone up 50% in this state. Because housing prices have gone up so much, we then see people moving into the rental market and then rents going up. I spoke to a woman who came out of retirement because she no longer could afford the rent on her apartment. She had to start working again. And I have stories like that all over the state. So we're never going to make New Jersey more affordable if we don't make housing more affordable. And that's where I start. We have to build more. We have to drive down costs through permitting reform, regulatory reform, having support for first-time home buyers so they can make that down payment to get into a home. And then really making sure that we're repurposing commercial properties and already been built out space because we do have a very densely populated state. So we have got to utilize the land wisely.
Affordable housing, the Mount Laurel decision, 50 years ago now, requires every town to provide a fair share of affordable housing. Last year's law to streamline the process has hit legal and political obstacles. What specific plans do you have to address affordable housing?
So my frustration with Mount Laurel is that 50 years ago, it was an incredibly innovative decision to address historic redlining and to address the affordability crisis. Unfortunately, today, 50 years later, we have an affordability crisis and some of the most segregated school systems in the nation. So we've got to do more, which is why I start with building more houses. If we are going to drive down costs and make homes affordable for everyone, we've got to build more. It truly is a supply and demand problem. And that's why I look to spaces around transit-oriented development, building out areas in Trenton, for example, which historically has had about 190,000 people and now is down to 80,000. So we've really got to utilize our spaces better, Fort Monmouth, Atlantic City, etc., so we can build out in those areas, because a lot of people who need to move into affordable housing need public transportation. And so we really need to be thoughtful about how we're building out this state.
Housing, as you know, has a major impact on our schools, which you pointed out has facing de facto segregation. The Trump administration has cut $1.2 billion in education funding for New Jersey, closed the program that funded Head Start, and another that helped Jersey farmers provide fresh food to schools as well as food pantries, and cut off $85 million in pandemic relief money. Our schools are the magnet that draw so many families here. How do you shore up and improve our public schools?
Well, as my friend Governor Janet Mills would say, I'm going to see this administration in court. I'm a former federal prosecutor, and this is unacceptable. These are areas that Congress has designated to the executive branch to run, and they're not running them. And if that is the case, then they need to send those federal dollars back to New Jersey. Because if they're not going to run the programs that they are legally obligated to run, then we will run them here, but we need to claw those federal dollars back. And that's exactly what I do.
I want to get into taxes and how you're going to pay for all this, but right now let's move to health care. The NJ Family Care Health Program relied on more than $14 billion in federal funds. That's now in jeopardy, or maybe gone by now. The Trump administration and Congress are weighing cutting Medicaid that nearly 2 million people here rely on. How do you fill the gap?
This is one of my big fights in Congress right now, and this is why I encourage so many people to mobilize. I'm on the Rapid Response Task Force in Congress, working on amicus briefs and taking the administration to court. We're working on legislation to hold people accountable and to push forward bills to get people on the record so that they are forced to make decisions, because we see that just about every Republican, except I think one in the House, and he simply didn't think the cuts went deep enough, every single Republican voted to cut Medicaid by $880 billion. That would be a significant hit to New Jersey. We know 1 in 3 children are on Medicaid for health insurance. Many people rely on it to take care of seniors in their family in nursing homes. We would see devastating results if they make these cuts. And Republicans right now have suggested they're not going to do that. So that's why it's so important to keep the pressure on. I was just at a hands-off rally yesterday, reminding people how important this mobilization on the ground is as we fight back against government, take them to court to claw back that funding, and then here in our state, make changes to make things more affordable. Holding PBMs accountable. Those are the middlemen in prescription drug prices, driving them up to 10 times. Making sure we have an independent auditor for the SHBP. That's the health insurance that's costs are really, really high. It's driving up property costs. We need to also oversee them better.
It sounds like you might have to raise taxes.
You know what? That's not where I go first, obviously. We have a state with very high taxes. I hear about it all the time. We have the highest property taxes in the country, the highest corporate taxes in the country. So I think this idea that that's always the answer is sometimes lazy thinking. I think we have to really look structurally at how we're running this state. So if we're just kind of going back to the well because people can't afford homes here, and we're not actually looking at how we're going to build the supply of homes we need to drive down costs, we're only helping a minuscule part of the population, not even all the people that need to be helped with affordable homes. So for example, right now, the builder's remedy results often in building huge luxury apartment buildings to be offset by a couple affordable. That's never going to get us where we need to be.
Women's health care, abortion. Should we should we change it? Should we improve it? Should we erase the ability to have an abortion?
Oh
What's
dear
your
God, no. Yeah, that would be horrible. We're seeing actually in some of the states that have gone towards that part of the spectrum, horrible results. People dying in emergency rooms because they can't receive an abortion as they're miscarrying. Doctors let them die on the table, and a simple procedure would save their life. So we've got to do more to protect it. It really puts women in severe risk. I had encouraged the governor. I'm so glad to see he's doing things like stockpiling mifepristone. I think we need some more shield laws in the state. I'd like to see them as strong as New York's shield laws for practitioners. I also I think we need a constitutional amendment. And I hear from people, oh, it's fine. The courts have withstood it. We have really strong protections here. We don't need this constitutional amendment.
Roe was protected by the courts, not the Constitution.
I mean, I think that says it all. So I am a big fan of constitutional amendment to protect abortion here. And I remind people too, because I do think a lot of people feel as if abortion here is safe and protected in New Jersey. And it is today. But if we have a Republican in office as governor, if Jack Ciattarelli, for example, is governor, he will be in lockstep with Washington Republicans. We've already seen his history of voting to defund Planned Parenthood, I believe, when he was in office. So we know he won't protect a woman's right to choose. And we know that being in lockstep with Trump is going to take away a lot of protections that women have in the state.
Transit, you mentioned it. Corporate taxes and federal funds pay for highway repair, bridge replacement. Amtrak pays for NJ Transit. How much power does a governor have to fix the roads and the rails?
Ton of power. Again, it just takes vision. So first of all, you've got to hold Amtrak accountable. I mean, I was going back and forth with them, and finally, got to the point where got $300 million through Congress so we could at least start to address some of those catenary wires, even though they're still not willing to, I think, quite discuss them in the way I'd love to see. But we've got to have a plan for Amtrak to take care of their rail better, because I get the sense that their idea is they're just going to fix it as they build out the Gateway Tunnel, but that's 10 more summers of hell for us. So that's not acceptable. New Jersey Transit has to come up with a long-term strategy on transit-oriented development. That's what other nations use to have a dedicated source of funding. We already see areas like East Orange and Bloomfield really building out the transit areas. This is really desirable housing for young people and seniors who really like to live in our downtown areas, like to have public transportation. And then we need a vision for the state, because a lot of our transit right now, these rail lines were determined in the 1800s. I mean, you look at towns like my town of Montclair or Madison or Chatham or Morristown, really built up along the train lines, which sort of tells you two things. One, New Jersey's changed a lot since the 1800s, so we need to really take a look at the map of the state and where we're mapping out our transit systems. But two, what an economic gift thoughtful public transportation is to different towns in different areas, and how we can build those out with some forethought and strategy could really help us in this state economically.
What about expanding highways?
I think what the first place we need to look is public transportation, because all of our highways are over capacity. So when we look at how we're going to build out this state and how we're going to move people around it, public transportation is one of the keys here. We really have to make the commute in and out of our cities, whether it's New York or Philadelphia, easy on the public transit so we can get people off the roads. I think we need to look at north-south transit. We need to look at South Jersey, which is some transportation deserts. The Glassboro-Camden light rail is a great idea. So really making sure that's funded, et cetera. But I think what we first need to do is envision, hey, this is the state, these are areas of growth, this is where we're building out housing developments, this is where we're building out new business areas, and this is the transit that it's going to take to move people around the state.
Let's talk about immigration. Trump administration is investigating Governor Murphy, as you know, over his immigration policies and wants to allow ICE to expand that private facility in Newark as a prison to detain more immigrants. How will you ensure protection and due process for the undocumented?
So first of all, I've long been against, since the last session of Congress, Delaney Hall and turning it into a private prison. We've seen
This is the Newark
this is the
facility.
Newark facility, and we've seen just really these private prison companies are really bad stewards of prisons, egregious conduct going on in these prisons. We know GEO, which is the company that wants to reopen it, has been particularly bad, tons of complaints against them. I would suggest that a lot of the reason they've been awarded this contract is they gave millions of dollars to Trump's campaign. So I am completely opposed to this and continuing to fight this. It was just in court this week at the Third Circuit, so we're waiting on that decision. And then we also have right now an administration that is picking people up off the street without charges and disappearing them, as we see in some of the most egregious acts in foreign countries around the world, places I have served. And so I have been telling people, this shouldn't just fall into the immigration space. This is a constitutional violation. It's a due process violation. And if anyone feels safe in this environment, then they should take a second look at what might be happening here. Because I will tell you, it doesn't stop with people who are immigrants to this country. It continues on, and Trump has even suggested deporting American citizens. It continues on to people who speak out against the government, and then they get disappeared. So this is an incredibly dangerous situation. As governor, I'm going to follow the Constitution and the laws and make sure people in this state are protected.
Climate. New Jersey has a roaring fire down in Ocean County. The devastation from Sandy, which was 13 years ago, hard to believe, is still apparent. Congress has cut $217 million in federal funding for 212 New Jersey projects that addressed climate change and killed the jobs that they would have created. Bill Murphy's proposed cutting 12.5%. Could you resurrect any of these climate protection projects without federal help?
So I think some of that depends on where the federal cuts are coming from with the Department of Education, with Medicaid, and how much money we can claw back, and then what our budget looks like as we're trying to continue to run the state despite the federal government seeming like they're intent on economically punishing this country for some vision that I don't understand. But that said, I think when we look to the future, there's a couple things. First of all, power generation in this state. We talked a little bit about earlier about how utility costs are set to go up. That's because we've had a mismanaged grid by PJM. They've failed to push a lot of the new cheap, clean power into the grid. Solar is the cheapest form of power right now. That's why Texas is the biggest adopter. Our state really can adopt more. We've only gone up about 25%. I think the average has been 150%. So we have opportunities with community solar. We have opportunities with the state building out utility grade solar on landfills, capped landfills, on state buildings. We really need to move on that and force the grid operator to push that into our grid. And we've seen other states holding them more accountable, like Pennsylvania and Maryland governors really pushing it and saying, look, we're making some demands here because you guys are really not being good operators in this space. And then we need a long-term plan of how we are going to power our state, drive down carbon costs. And I think that's nuclear. But that's a 10-year proposition. So this is why I think we need a new kind of leadership here. Because I often say nuclear and people say, oh, Mikie, that's a 10-year project. And I say, okay, so in 10 years, are we just going to be sitting around the table saying, gosh, power's gone through the roof and we don't have any? We have got to address these challenges now, and we've got to take them on, and we've got to start thinking long-term in the state and not just how we limp along year over year and see worse and worse results. And then when we don't make our budget work here, we're really mortgaging the future for our children. We're putting it on their backs. So that's why coming up with the nuclear plan. That'll get us into really reduction in carbon and the power generation we need and drive down utility costs. And then we need to build more resiliently because I just, even before these horrible cuts, which I totally disagree with cuts in climate change, because we have to address this really, really quickly. But after watching those wildfires in LA, I think we just know that we're not going to be able to constantly rely on FEMA and federal support because between Katrina and Sandy and the wildfires in LA, it's just going to bankrupt the nation. We need to start building more thoughtfully, more resiliently, looking to the future of what that's going to take. And so I think here in the state, New Jersey has some really good building codes. We just need to make sure that we are enforcing them and ensuring we're building resiliently because unfortunately, as we see some of these climate problems, I think we're going to have to make sure that we're not just, the old model where everything gets wiped away, you go to insurance, you rebuild until the next thing, because these 100-year storms are coming every 5 years. And that's what we have to prepare for here.
How are you going to pay for all your programs if you're not going to raise taxes on the people of New Jersey?
So a lot of this comes down to running this more efficiently. So having an independent auditor for SHBP, the State Health Benefits Program, can save millions and millions of dollars because right now we don't know where all the money is going. It's not necessarily coming back into state coffers when the insurance company takes the hospital system to court. We're not tracking that. We also need to make sure people are paying their fair share. I'll tell you, when we added more people to the IRS, that is a net benefit. That's not a net cost because we're just making sure everyone's fairly paying their taxes. And then also taking a look across the state at how if we build out the homes of the future, that gives us more ratables for people. If we actually have the type of housing we need, that also pushes money into state coffers. So there's a lot of things we can do as we grow. I'm not saying that's off the table or there's never an opportunity to look at it. But I think when you immediately say to any problem, I'm going to raise taxes, you're not holding yourself accountable for innovating and spending the money and the revenue we're raising today in a really thoughtful way. You're not thinking to the future, you're just relying on some of the old systems that aren't working and saying, oh, well, if they're broken, we'll just keep raising. We're coming to a breaking point. We really are. There's just a lot of people who can't afford homes, who aren't going to be able to afford their utility costs. I hear from food banks, the use of food banks went up tremendously during COVID. I thought it would go back down. It hasn't. I'm hearing from food banks, a lot of people, they're not going to miss their rent or their mortgage. But with those as high as they are, they now have to come to us for food support. So this is right now a state that is just not working for working people. And that's what I'm really driven to fix.
How would you rate Governor Murphy?
So I think Governor Murphy has done some innovative things. I'm excited about Netflix moving here.
To Fort Monmouth, right?
Yep, to Fort Monmouth. And we have opportunities to build out housing there as well. And I think there's a contract in place now. It's fallen through quite a few times. And I think part of that has been a permitting and regulatory problem, but I think we're on track now. And so I think some of the business development has been really helpful to drive some jobs in. There's innovation. I see some of the development he's done in conjunction with some of the federal programs that I worked on, has really helped reshore some American manufacturing in the state, which is great. I've worked closely with NJMEP to do some of that. And he's taken, as you've probably heard, different business development trips, which I think has made our state kind of open for business, if you will, which I'm really excited about. I also think that he has really put a focus on setting climate goals and kind of gotten our state into the mindset of what are we going to do about meeting some of our carbon goals and some of our power goals. Where I want to do more as governor is putting in place some of the structure to get to those goals. If we are going to move into more electric vehicles, making sure we have the charging stations built out. And so people can, people aren't going to adopt electric vehicles if they're not sure that they can charge them or that they feel they might get stuck. There's some opportunities I think we have in trucking in the state. We're a logistics state. We're just such a key here. That's why you see that's why, I don't know if you've gone to other states and thought, oh my gosh, I forgot something. I'm just going to go on Amazon to have it here in the morning, and you realize, oh, that doesn't happen in other states. Like New Jersey is special, right? Because we have everybody right around the corner. And we also have a huge amount of the population east of the Mississippi within a very short distance from New Jersey. So it's a huge logistics state. So as we're kind of looking, a lot of our trucking takes place within the state. So if we build out the trucking charging stations, we have opportunities there too for more clean trucking. If you develop the plan for within the state trucking, how they're going to charge though, I don't think there are any truck charging stations in the state right now. So we're never going to move into clean trucking.
They idle in long miles of trying to get into the ports.
And they can't recharge anywhere. So we're never going to have clean trucking if we don't have any charging stations. So I'd love to see kind of some thoughtful build out of the infrastructure. And then again, and some of the bigger pushes into solar, and then permitting and regulatory reform. That is something that day one, start to look through all of the laws and regulations. And Trenton seems
because it's too cumbersome.
Because it's too cumbersome. It costs so much money. I've talked to a couple great New Jersey companies who are going to remain headquartered here. They have such a connection to our state, but they're building outside our state. And so when I asked why, I said, are the costs too high? Because we're a high cost state. And they said, no. They said, sometimes those costs go to the education system and we need that workforce, and the workforce here is so great. They said, it's time though. I can be cutting a ribbon on a factory in Pennsylvania before I can even get through the permitting process in New Jersey. And that costs money. We need to get through that process faster here in the state. And we've seen it work. I think Josh Shapiro next door has cut through permitting to the extent that I think it's 90%. He's gotten through about 90% of the time down to open up a small business. So we can definitely adopt much of that here in New Jersey and get our systems to work more quickly.
And he got the bridge rebuilt in what, 6 days?
I think 11, 12 days.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. So we have some options here.
You can get it done. If you win, you will have 3 years to deal with President Trump. How will you leverage the power of the state to block what you've called a constitutional wrecking ball?
So, this is something that it's not my first time dealing with the Trump administration. In fact, in the last Trump administration, I both fought him, but was able to get, different things done. So, for example, I led a group of national security Democrats in moving the caucus towards impeachment in my first term in Congress when Trump was in office, and yet at the same time was able to pass the state opioid response grant funding because we were facing an opioid crisis here. So it is both taking on the administration in those important fights, but the thing is, and the thing I've learned over time, you can't do it alone. So that's why it's so important that we see these colleges and universities banding together, that we see these law firms coming together. We need to come together with other states across the nation in some of this litigation, in some of these fights against the administration, so that we can better utilize the power of the states in this federalism government. And I tell people, because people, who sort of think they're going to give in this area and then be left alone, that's not how Trump works. He's like a schoolyard bully. So he takes your money or your lunch money from you on Monday. He doesn't go to somebody else on Tuesday. He knows you're a weak mark and he comes back Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. That's why you have to band together and make sure you are taking this administration on and putting in place the things in your state to make the state work better. So I will both, as governor, take on Washington, but build in really efficient government here on the ground to provide a compelling path forward that's so different from what we're seeing from Washington. And I think that's going to be very powerful for our state. I think it's going to be very powerful across the nation as people model some of what they're doing after what we're doing kind of right here in this region of the country.
Did you know that New Jersey has never elected a governor from the same party consecutively? It's always a Republican, a Democrat, a Republican. It's the Republicans' turn. What makes you think a Democrat can win this time?
So I think that what we see coming from Washington is horrible. I think even people who wanted, liked some of Trump's messaging or even liked some of what's going on, it's going too far. So when I talk to people, even people who really voted for Trump because of immigration, and I've long been a fan of comprehensive immigration reform, making sure we have secure borders, processing people quickly, pathway to citizenship for DACA and TPS recipients, making sure, that we are taking unscrupulous employers to court so that we're not driving down wages for working people. So all these things I believe deeply in, but what Trump is doing is not only not actually fixing the broken immigration system, but now picking people up off the street without charges. Even some of the most, the loudest voices in the space that are anti-immigrant in this nation will still say, you got to charge people. I mean, this is just really, really un-American. And then we see someone like Pete Hegseth, who is the most abysmal Secretary of Defense we've ever had in this nation. And then we see the whole Department of Defense making us less secure. That's making people unhappy. And then we see tariffs. So I've talked to everybody from Javelove here in Montclair, who's put out a note saying prices are going up because of tariffs, to a builder here in Montclair who's saying I've stopped all projects because HVAC systems are going up 30 to 40%. So we are seeing the hits on our economy here. So running a state well and driving down costs as governor is going to stand in such stark contrast to the hits we're taking from Washington. And this is going to be the vision and the path forward. And I think New Jersey is so critically important in this effort right now.
Mikie Sherrill, thank you for being with us.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
I want to thank you so much for taking the time to watch the interviews with Mary Alice Williams. Are you looking to take the next step? Then come on and join the Montclair Dems. We're a statewide organization with a network of more than 12,000 volunteers across New Jersey. Please visit themontclairdems.com to start making an impact today. And thanks again for taking a few minutes to join us.